Hi, welcome everyone. Chris Petri here. Thanks so much for coming by. I'm glad you could stop by. We're going to do some really beautiful watercolor work today. We had one of our subscribers made a comment, I think it was on an email actually, saying that we should maybe cover some Edward Wesson style paintings. And I absolutely agree. Edward Wesson, if you're a watercolor artist, it's a great thing to research some of Ed Wesson's work, because he does phenomenal watercolors, and they're really kind of, for a watercolor artist, you can get a lot of great ideas and some really fantastic techniques that he used really translate well for watercolor. He also did, he's an English painter. He was born around the turn of the century, early 1900s. And he also did oils, beautiful oils. I have a book or two in my library, so I've looked through the books many times, and I got a lot of ideas when I was first painting watercolor. I really loved drawing and sketching from his paintings, his watercolors. So we're going to do something similar. I had actually a small sketch I did out nearby where I live, and this is... it's like a small inlet from the Atlantic Ocean. There was a small inlet, and it had some boats and a couple shacks along the waterway. So I did a little pencil sketch out in the field in my notebook. So this is basically what the sketch looks like. It's very, primitive, and kind of just, I got down some ideas with a pencil, loosely sketching, just, getting in some ideas. But it had, some interesting boats and some water. And there was, some really interesting subject matter here that I remember. And I think I took some pictures. I couldn't find the pictures, but I did find one of my sketches of this area nearby where I live. So in the shore area, near the shore area, it's about an hour drive from my house. So we'll use this sketch. I'll set this across from me. It's a pencil sketch. But, you can use any reference material. You can go to online and look up Ed Wesson's work, and he's got like literally hundreds of watercolor paintings I know that I've seen online that are similar with, a lot of water scenes, boats, fishing shacks, landscapes with trees. And he does so many beautiful paintings. So we can look those up online as we study. And so we'll use this sketch as just our basic sketch for our painting, and we'll just talk about the techniques as we go that Ed Wesson used. And I'm going to get a pencil here, a mechanical pencil, and I'm going to look at my sketch. Okay, as I look at my sketch, it's about, again, we try to lay out our painting somewhat. See, looking at it, it's almost about halfway where the water line is, or horizon line. We could call that the horizon line. So that's good. And we can say the light is coming from this side. From the sketch when I sketched it, it looks like the light is coming from the right. So I put an insignia on the tape here. Okay, and then on this left side there was like a fishing shack, so I'm going to just make it's basically like a triangle shape, almost like a sail. And then there's a wall there coming straight down, and there's a window here. That's basically just a rectangle. Then there's a dock here. And I'll just put a few indications of pilings that go down into the water, along the water here. And then here is, there's a boat along here, a sailboat. So I'm just going to put that sailboat in there. And I'll lightly pencil in that reflection. I always like to make sure I pencil in a reflection of the boat in the water this way in case I'm doing any darker watercolors. Like let's say the boat is like a light color. I just want to make sure that I keep this idea of the reflection of the boat in the water. This is all water here. So I take that boat shape and I just reflect it into the water casually. And there's a mast here in the boat. We'll go up there like that. Just do a quick mast. And then here in the distance, there's some hills. And I'll lightly sketch this. I'm not going to get really overly detailed with the sketch. I think Ed Wesson painted the same way. I think his drawings were very light. I think he just did a preliminary sketch like this, very light, just to get some basic ideas on there. And then he went and painted. That was most of the focus, was the water and the paint. And there's a sailboat back here. And if I see it's a little bit over here, it's getting into the distance a little bit. So here, this is larger, it's closer to us. Then here, this is trailing off into the distance a little bit, so I'll make this other sailboat over here smaller, and the mast like that. And then we have some trees over here. There's also a small cottage here along the side by the water, so we're going to put that in too as well. And again, it's a light sketch. We're not going too detailed, just to get a basic idea in, and then we're going to do most of the interesting part of this is going to be the painting, and there's some shoreline over here on the left, and then there's the water is in this section here, so there's a little bit of shoreline here as it goes around. And that's about all we would need for our sketch. And again, we're following after like the Wesson technique, and that's a glazing technique. So what we'll do is we'll get our first lighter washes on the paper, and then after that we'll start to fill in our mediums and darker tonal values onto the painting. And we should have a fun time of this. This is really enjoyable. It's this is like a 6x9 watercolor paper. I'm using Arches rough paper. It's the if you look, usually you'll see that Arches has different colors for their watercolor pads. So this is the orange pad. So if you're going to look online for Arches paper, it's the orange pad, and the smooth paper is usually the pink pad. So this is the orange pad, and a lot of watercolor artists use this. And for Wesson style paintings, I think rough paper is key, because you can get a lot of the really nice textures when we're painting trees and foliage, and even in the water. Some of those textures really work great with rough paper, Arches rough paper especially. It's a great watercolor paper. You can practice on less expensive paper, and then if you're going to do, like, let's say a finished painting, you might try a few trees and a few boats on some practice paper, and then we can go in and do the finished painting on a more high quality paper. And so now we're going to mix up some paint, and we'll keep following the process here. And I always mention, if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing to my channel. We do watercolor paintings every weekend, and every week we cover all the fundamentals of watercolor, the techniques, basic fundamentals, and then we also get into some more detailed considerations for more expert level watercolor artists. So you kind of get a mix of everything. I do try to do that. I try to mix in all of the information so that whether if you're a beginner or you're an intermediate watercolor artist or you're more of an expert and you've been doing it for 15, 20 years or so, I believe you can still get some good information here on my channel. So I also hope you'll thumbs up if you like this video, and let's keep going here. So I have fresh, clean water. I'm going to, in my mind, I'm going to think a nice, cool sky. Some Viridian green and some, this would be Prussian blue, a little bit of Viridian green. And then I'll mix in some burnt umber over here and some cerulean blue. So these are going to be light. This is going to be really light tonal values here. So these mixtures are really light. I'm just going to put them in the pan here in my watercolor pan, my Schminke pan. This is really a great small palette for doing smaller size paintings. And so we have our colors that we're going to mix up. So we're doing some Viridian green on the left, Prussian blue in the middle, and then a little bit of a burnt umber and cerulean blue on the right. That gives us a nice range of different colors. And maybe a little bit of French ultramarine in that too as well. A little bit of a nice grayish mixture. Burnt umber, French ultramarine, and cerulean. All right, and we'll start out thinking let's get some water on the sky. Dab on some water onto your paper, but not the whole thing. This is the way Edward Wesson would do it. He would dab on some, put on some wash in the sky, not everywhere, in some hit and miss spots, like so. A little bit of it, water, fresh water in the water. So this is the water section here where the boat is. So we put in some fresh, clean water there too. And again, hit and miss with the water, not the whole complete page, but just some spots here and there. This gives a nice effect. Then we're going to start out, we're going to use some of our Viridian green and Prussian blue. And we're just going to place those colors in the sky area. And then bring it down into the water, this bay area here. And since it's a very light wash, it can go other places. You can bring it into the shoreline here and over here. No big deal. Then we're going to take some of that grayish mixture. And then this would be just adding some variation to the cloud colors. And then we can bring that cloudy, more grayish color. Burnt umber, French ultramarine blue, a little bit of cerulean blue. And we could put some in the water, reflection in the water area. And then I'll add a little more fresh, clean water. And that's about it. So it's really, you can see, very simple. We just added a very light wash of our colors we mixed. We pre-mixed them. And I just step back and I look at it and I say, well, I'd rather have a completely wet edge at the top, like this. And then it can be a little more hit and miss. The clouds, maybe that cloud feeling over here in the more distant sky. We can even add a little bit of orange, very little touch of orange, just a tiny bit for the more of the distant sky back here. Like that. And then you can take a tissue if you want. You can take a tissue and just dab up any water you see running. This is meant to be a little bit, you know, heavy on the water. We're not doing like more of a drier technique. This is definitely adding more water to our painting. And if you have to, you just, any puddles, we take our tissue and wipe those up, and that's pretty good. So now what we're going to do next is we're going to let this dry. So I'm going to use a blow dryer, but you can take a break at this point. It's better just to take a break for maybe like a half an hour and then come back. If it's hot and sunny out and you're outdoors, well, it'll dry fast. So this process would really take 10 minutes. But if we're indoors and we're working and it's not as hot and sunny, it's going to take a while to dry. So let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and we'll start to do our middle and darker tones. Okay, we'll be right back. All right, now our paper is dry. We're, for the most part, it might be a touch damp, but that's okay. As long as we're pretty much, the majority of the paper is pretty dry and there's not much, you wouldn't see any kind of dampness or any kind of light sheen of water on your paper at this point. You would pretty much see it all looking very dry. But if the paper is buckled a little bit, then you would know that it's still a little damp. If you have it taped down and you, or if you're using a pad, usually when it's completely 100% dry, the paper will go back to a more flat state where there's no buckles or anything. So this is still drying, so it does, but it's very little water in the paper, so it's just damp, but you can touch anywhere on the paper and there's no signs of water. It's just in the deeper portions of the paper. So that's a perfect time. We can go back in and start painting again. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to focus on the middle tones and dark tones. We're going to do some trees and some boats and some water. Water is mostly already done for us. We have that light wash on the water. So we're pretty good with the water. And let's start in here and let's mix up some colors. We can take our palette and just with a paper towel, just keep our palette a little bit neat. And we're going to mix up some colors. Let's go in. We'll use some burnt umber, sap green. Burnt umber, sap green, a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of French ultramarine blue, maybe a little bit of the Prussian blue, a little bit of olive green. So we're going to mix up some greens. Basically our two greens that we use most times, sap green, olive green, and French ultramarine blue, a little bit of Prussian blue. And maybe that should be good for our darker green. We'll add a little more sap green to that. Then what we'll do next is I'm going to move to a smaller brush than what I used for the sky. I'm going to go with a little bit of a smaller brush here. Let's take a look around. What do we have here? I think we have the next step down, number 6, Da Vinci, and this is a travel brush. And we'll use a tissue. We'll take some of this green, burnt umber, sap green, basically, with a little bit of French ultramarine blue. We can add some Prussian blue. And then we dry off the brush a little bit with the tissue. And then we see if we can get that really nice tree effect. Let's start over here. Circular motions. and we just scrub on some tree shapes here, and that looks pretty good. So you can see it's sort of just like a nice circular motion. You can try practicing. The best way to do this would be, you know, a scrap piece of paper. So I would take a scrap piece of paper if you have watercolor, and then just try some lightly doing that circular motion, and leave lots of space in between the portions of the tree. And then when we go in, we'll do some with the liner brush. We'll do the branches like that. But that's what we just leave that. We leave nice spaces in between the croppings of leaves on the trees, and that makes for a really nice, pleasing, pleasant tree effect. And then we can add a little bit of some darker darks on the undersides of the croppings, so the light would be where the light hits the trees on the tops, it's lighter, and then underneath is the little bit of a darker, the shade side underneath, like that. So we could try that on scrap paper first, maybe, you know, for 5 or 10 minutes before we start here, and then we can do that over here. And then maybe we'll mix up a little mineral violet, some purple for the shade. For some of the shady feel, cooler feel. And now here we're going to paint around the top of that cottage here. And I'm using this mineral violet with a little bit of the mixture of the green and the brown and the blue. Then we can change, and maybe we'll take some green. And we'll take some more of that purple, and we'll mix it in with the green. And we're going to try to make a little bit of a variation in the mixture here. So we don't want to just go all the way across the picture with the same, does this make sense? The same color. So what we do is we take the purple and we just mix it in to some of this mixture. And then we also took a little bit of yellow ochre with a little bit of the purple mix too. And a little bit of the green, sap green. And we mix that with the purple. So this way we have we've mixed almost like 3 colors, but they're very slightly different. But it'll look really good as we go across the shoreline here. And I noticed that this is what Edward Wesson would do. He would change the colors as he would go in his painting. And then I'll go back up here and do some more of the... And what could be helpful is I didn't mix as much here, and you can, when you first start, you can mix a little more, so you don't have to keep going back and mixing more. I tend to try to mix, not overmix too much. I don't want to waste paint, so I tend to... And then here I'm making it a little bit darker because I feel like this is getting closer to the foreground over here, where this fishing shack is over here on the left. So the colors are lighter in the distance, and then they're going to start to get darker, the colors, tonal values, as we come closer to the front of the picture, where we're like if we were standing, let's say. And that's really kind of the basics of it. Closer to us in the picture, let's say we're standing in any scene, let's pretend we're always standing with a camera taking a picture. The closest to us when we're taking a picture in our scene, whatever it is we're painting, doesn't matter what subject matter it is, the closer it is to us, 90% of the time, the closer it is to us, it's going to be darker. The colors are going to be darker and richer. And then as things go further in the distance away from us, from where we're standing, if we were hypothetically taking a picture, it's going to get more cooler, the colors, more lighter in tonal value. So that's always a principle we keep in mind when we're painting and we're working out our colors and tonal values. So here it's a little darker. We're getting close by here. And we'll keep working from this. Maybe we'll mix over here, we'll mix some cerulean blue. And we'll just do and that's where you get that cool effect. With the arches rough paper, you can get those like feeling of texture on the roof here. We're getting some texture there. And also in the trees, we got some more texture over here, and we do a couple more darker tree shapes here and there. And we'll try to keep this darker. We'll make this like a wood color. Let's go over here. We'll make a nice wood color, brown, burnt umber, some burnt sienna, yellow ochre. So we're gonna make, and then maybe a little touch of cobalt blue, just for some variation. And we're gonna make this shack here, this fishing shack. We're gonna make this a darker tonal value. And that's all. We can even add in some French ultramarine blue. And burnt umber. Some burnt sienna. Yeah, let's make this good and dark here on this side. This is right close to us. If we're standing there in the scene and we're taking a photo, or if we're painting and sketching along this nice scene, close by here is going to be nice and dark. And okay, there's some pilings here, so we're going to sort of just make these darks over here. And since this is water here underneath the shack here, we have pilings coming down into the mud and the waterway here. We're just going to take those shapes and just go right down into we just maybe put a little bit of movement into them. Okay, we can leave that like that. That's fine. And always remember, we can always go back and do a little bit of touch-up here and there. So when we're painting and we're doing a painting, never feel like you have to do everything 100% throughout your painting. When you're working on your painting, you can always go back in, toward the end of your painting, when you're sort of finishing up, you can go back and do some touch-ups, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to touch up a little more on this fishing shack here. And I'll touch up some more over here. I'm going to add, actually I didn't finish over here. So you can see I didn't finish over here. I'm going to finish this area over here. So I kind of move around the painting, but you always feel like you're just sort of working things as you go throughout your painting. You can always come back to a section. You never have to feel like you have to finish everything in one pass when you're doing this painting. You can always come back and do more to it. You can wait till the next day and add your finishing touches if you want. Sometimes I do that. All right, so we've got our fishing shack here. Let's go back over here. Let's do this over here. Now this is going to be a little cooler, so let's add some. So I'm going to take that dark mixture and then just add some cerulean blue to it to make it cooler. All right. And then we can take some olive green. We'll start doing some grass over here. And then the grass in the distance will be a little cooler, so let's add some purple and blue. And don't feel like you have to use all these mixtures. You can make it more simple, the painting. So for the grass over here, you could just make it like some green and some cerulean blue. And then as we're closer by, I'm going to go with a little bit of cadmium lemon yellow. Then I'll take that cadmium lemon yellow and olive green. I'll put some of that over here, balance the picture. If I'm using a little bit of cadmium lemon yellow over here, you know, I would want to add it up here a little bit too. Alrighty, that looks better. Okay. And again, we're using the technique of we did the first wash really light, and then the second wash now, we are using darker tonal values, the darker darks. And we're getting there. We're going to do a little more. So these boats here, I'm going to put some shadowing under these boats here in the distance. And I'll do negative shape painting, which is painting around an object to make it appear. So I'm painting some darks around these boats here just to make them look a little better. You know, we'll do the masts here in the water, just a little that little. Okay, and then we'll do some French ultramarine blue and a little bit of that brown mix. I'll dry off my brush a little bit. If you find there's too much water flooding onto your paper, you can always just, you have your tissue and you just tap off some paint on your brush, and we'll do some shadowing here. And then we'll do some shadowing under the boats here, the sailboats. Nice shadowing, just a little scribbly look. Shadows are scribbly. They're not really defined so much. The water's moving, so if the water's moving and shimmering, then your shadows are going to shimmer, and that's why we sort of do the little squiggly lines, and that's it. And then here, we're going to put a little shadow under this boat, like that. And that's going to be a white boat, and we'll just put a little shadow on the I'll do a little shadowing on the underside of the boat like that. And I'll let the paper dry a little more over here so I can put that mast in. But what I could do is I can take my darks dry off my brush with the tissue, and then I can just do a little, I could start out here, then, maybe like that for the mast. Like that. Maybe I'll use a tiny bit of white paint to touch up the top of the boat here, but everything else is looking pretty good. The distant boats here, we're not worrying about that too much. That's more in the distance, so we're not going to... I'll put a little door there on the fishing shack over here, or cottage. And that's pretty good, and then we'll... For these, I'll use my needlepoint brush for the distant sails. And I just rest my hand on the paper and then just take my brush and just... Nothing too fancy. I don't go, just... Being too careful can sometimes be a problem, so I just go with a couple, some more in the distance there. And then that looks pretty good. We can also use our needlepoint brush, and we'll do some branches here. That looks pretty good. Okay, I hope we had a fun time with this. This is really a nice feel for a seascape type picture. We have our boats, some trees, some water, an interesting sky with the water, the beautiful blues and greens of the sky a little bit to give it that nice cooler feeling. And then we'll do a couple details here. So I'll make some more darks here just to... We'll do some dark burnt umber, French ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. And then maybe we'll just do a couple darks under this roof here just to make it more interesting. A couple lines there. Maybe we can go with a darker dark even yet. We'll use more French ultramarine blue and some burnt umber there to keep it a little bit warm feeling. And we'll do some there we go. So we have a nice little fishing shack with a railings and pilings going down, and we can probably add a little bit of the darker darks under here a little bit. Like that. Kind of mysterious looking over here on the left, which is good. And a little bit of darks there. Okay, that's looking good. And again, just a couple of final details we do. Sometimes if we, like here on the boat, so once in a while if your paint goes over a spot, when you're painting, no worries. You just know that when you're toward the finishing parts of your painting, you can go back and do a little touch up here and there, and you'll be fine. So no need to get worried about it as you're painting. And as we know as watercolor artists, it always looks better when we're like doing the last 10 minutes of our painting or 15 minutes. The first usually half an hour, things don't really shape up until we sort of get towards the end, and then we can start to see everything looking really good and shaping up and looking much better as we're filling in our darker darks. And I think a little bit of, so here I'm going to do some more, not too much, but the water here, I just would rather put some lines just to make that feel like water a little bit. And I don't think doing too much is going to be, but just like that I think is looks good. Okay. All right, we'll see everybody on the next video. Let's peel off the tape here just so we can kind of see the framed out look. Okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe we'll even zoom in here. I'll set this down and slide this over. Okay, so this is a Wesson style painting. We did it in glazings, lights first, the light washes first, let the paint dry, and then go back in and we did our darks, middle tones and darks second. And it's just a nice scene along the waterway here, close by where I live. I know this is something that's definitely, whether you're a beginner, intermediate student, or whether you've been painting a long time, it's a fun painting to do. And we all can have fun with this. All right, everyone. See you on the next video. Bye-bye.